Yo, Parish Orphans and Retrogrades, special episode today because I'm sitting down with Pastor Joel Webbon, who has been making quite a splash on the internet in his own sphere there in Texas. Joel, great to have you on Rules for Retrogrades. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
You've been making a splash in the Protestant world in similar ways to that which I've been trying to make in the Catholic world. But, you know, in a couple of ways, you're talking about the role of patriarchy, the role of fathers. You're also talking about, secondarily and relatedly, the role of women in the home. This is the real splash. No one gets mad when you talk about fathers need to do this, or this. But when you start talking about what women do and what they haven't been doing, boy, you get in hot trouble. And thirdly, you've talked about something that I'd like to chat with you in the stream about, which is dispensationalism and the Old Testament people and things like that. But we'll kick that. That'll be the locals only segment after we talk about scripture. We say no scripture, no scriptural feminism. What do you say? And when did you get on this topic?
Yeah, I just call it biblical patriarchy or sexed piety is a term that some of my colleagues will use that I think makes sense. For me, it was like 2018, 2019. I was pastoring a church in California. I was born and raised in Texas, but I moved out there, like I've been clear from the get-go that it just wasn't wise. I moved out there prematurely, wanting to plant a church. And this is, as you know, Timothy, one of the clear weaknesses of Protestantism is, that you can just kind of do whatever you want. You can just do things like that might have, some validity in a political framework, but probably not great when it comes to the clergy. But it does exist within Protestant denominations, especially independent like Baptist churches. Where there's not, everything is the local autonomy of the church. And so the church polity is congregational. There's no denomination or diocese or anything above. And so, whereas the Catholics is an Episcopal polity, Baptists are congregational. So anyway, I set off prematurely to plant a church in California, but I was born and raised in Texas. And then I moved back to Texas about 5 years ago. As we started having kids and politically getting away from COVID, draconian lockdowns and things like that. But towards my last couple of years of my tenure there with the church I planted in California, which is still healthy and has a school now and is going strong. My last couple of years, 2018, 2019, I moved back in 2020. I did a series on the book of 1 Timothy. And so I was just doing expositional preaching, just text by text, few verses each week. Kind of like John MacArthur, who I'm grateful for, but strong disagreements with some of his Zionism stuff. But I'm mindful of him because he just passed away last night, and he did have an impact on me and many others in my camp. And he was famous for just verse by verse, so just preaching verse by verse through the Bible, less topical and just more textual. And so I was doing that through 1 Timothy. And when I got to 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 9 through 15, about women learning in quietness and full submission and not exercising authority over a man or teaching over a man, and then Paul roots it in the order of creation as well as the order of the fall and all those kinds of things. When I got there, instead of kind of speeding through, I decided, I'm going to take this text, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9 through 15, and I'm going to break it up. Typically, that would be kind of like one sermon, 1 week. And I decided I'm going to do like a 4-part mini series within this larger 1 Timothy series on just this text. And so I slowed down. And by the end of those 4 weeks, I lost a third of my church. And dude, I've gone back and listened. I took it down. Like, it's not even publicly available anymore. I went back. And
I know.
It was so liberal. It was so gay. It was like, it was like, it wasn't even that that bold. You know what I mean? Like I listen to it now and I'm convicted by the Holy Spirit. I'm like, gosh, why was I such a feminist? But it was enough, at the time in 2018, 2019, when you're kind of like that high watermark of wokeism and those kinds of things, and the context being in Southern California, that it was enough to severely offend pretty much everyone in the church, but a third of the church, enough to where they walked out.
What city were you in, Joel?
We were in San Diego.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, it matters in SoCal, because SoCal's not quite as liberal as people think. There's a lot of military in SoCal.
Right.
I'm a SoCal native, and I know that it matters, but it doesn't matter, right? Because SoCal ain't North Cal. Right. And it's not nearly as liberal, particularly San Diego, particularly lots of enclaves in LA aren't. But if you have...
It's because of the Navy in San Diego. And that helps. A lot of the military people helped to keep it a little bit more conservative.
But on the other hand, I moved here in COVID too, in the summer of 2020, because I got canceled over the issue and some other issues. And I chose to move to South Mississippi, very Baptist state, very red state, most conservative state, most Christian state, if you chat GPT it. And yet this issue still makes you basically on the fringe. And that's why I said it matters, but it doesn't matter. Yeah,
because a lot of Christianity and a lot of Baptist churches especially, they really are matriarchal. So like they're Christian, but it really is the women who are kind of leading the way. I call them like in complementarian, churches, and we could talk about that, like what is complementarianism. But in complementarianism, which is really just like egalitarian light, functionally is the way it shakes out. But complementarian churches, they'll be like, well, we're not libs, we're not feminists, we believe the Bible, we don't have female elders, and we don't have a woman preach on the Lord's Day. But other than that, a woman is functionally a man in every other regard. But in those churches, even though they have a male eldership, that's still, I call them the shadow elders. So like you'll have an elders meeting and everybody's agreed, and then 2 days later the senior pastor starts getting the phone calls one by one from each of the elders, and he's like, well, after thinking about it, after praying about it, I spent some time praying about it, and I don't really know if we should do this. And the proper response at that point is, I'd like to talk to the head of the home. Could you put your wife on the phone?
Yes.
It's not that you prayed for 48 hours and changed your mind. You went home and talked to your wife. Your wife wears the pants. She told you she didn't like it, and you changed your mind.
But how many people have I told that to, Steffi? Where I'm like, when you say go home and pray, I know what you mean. Mm-hmm. You have to vouchsafe that this is actually either prayerful or just as a function of practical intellect. Try to make decisions like that now. We coach the exact same thing. You are the inverse side of. I mean, people think you look like Matt Walsh, but you're much more Tim Gordon than Matt Walsh when it comes to this. You're the Protestant Tim Gordon. Here's one. I don't think we differ on the concept.
There's a little, real quick.
Yeah.
There's a little. I know it's sketchy, but I want to hold out in my prayers. I'm holding out. Love hopes all things for Matt Walsh. If he can get away from the Israeli wire, there could be a chance. I think you would agree. Like he's definitely the best of the Daily Wire.
Well, see, now Michael Walsh is a good friend of mine, and we've been friends along.
Michael Knowles,
and he's really, really strong. Michael Knowles is really strong on this sex issue. Really good.
You can tell, like Knowles, like Walsh is just kind of like your blue collar Catholic, and that's the appeal of Walsh. He's your everyman, but Knowles is. He can hang out with the plebes like myself, but you can tell he's read. He's done the reading, as the kids say.
He has, and he's a genuinely good guy. His wife is a genuinely good gal, convert to the faith. She's super pious. He's very pious, and they know a lot. And one time he was on another Catholic show, Matt Fradd. I don't know if you know who that is. And Matt Fradd said,
yep.
He goes, Matt Fradd did the thing that soft crypto feminists do, and they go, so I want to talk to you about complementarianism a second because it keeps popping up. But he goes, so like traditional roles, what does that mean? Like pants on men, and skirts on women, and he was saying it like it's a bad thing, and Knowles was like, no, because Knowles was a good thinker. He's like, well, no, of course not. But he was going to go some other direction. Then he'll stop himself. And I like all people who do this. I do this. I've seen you do this. But he'll go, no, actually, yes, it is that.
Yes.
I mean, that's a bit
Correct.
reductionist, Matt. But and I wanted to say something else that's a little more interesting, but because you put it that way, yes, it is as simple. Women in the kitchen and men not in the kitchen. Like,
good for him,
that.
man. That shows humility and also courage. That's really encouraging to hear, because you're absolutely right. So because the proper response to that is, some guy says, so you're just saying skirts on women and pants on men. The proper response is to say, yes, God's design, because it's not just roles. The roles are not arbitrary. God's not capricious. Right? So I tell people all the time, it's not like God has ordaineth that birds should fly and fish should swim arbitrarily, but also rooted in their design. He's called birds, commanded them, right? Like everything glorifies God by being to its truest potential what God designed it to be. Like I can look at a tree and say, that's a glorious tree, because it's very treely. It's the most treely tree I've ever, it's green, it's verdant, it's strong, it's sturdy, it's an oak. And so it's like, man, that tree, that's a dang good tree. That's a glorious tree. And so birds are called, they're commanded, their glory is their flight. But to think that like God has commanded birds to fly, and that has nothing to do with the design that he gave them wings and feathers and a hollow bone structure, or God commanded fish to swim, but it has nothing to do with gills and fins, and scales. Like of course the role stems from design, and so too with men and women. Men and women aren't just arbitrarily called to do different things, but we're actually designed differently. Male and female, he not just male and female, he called them or assigned them as roles, but male and female, he designed them. And so, yeah, so I appreciate a guy who would stop and say, because it is reductionist, but like the proper answer would be, skirts on women and pants on men. The proper answer is, it's so much more than that, but it's not less than that. So yes.
Right. Precisely. We call this the function argument. This is the Aristotelian thing, where it's like the treeness of that tree is opulent. It's full. It's a plenary treeness of that tree, and then that's exactly what it is. The the form in the matter. Of course, we have the hylomorphism. So when someone tries to put you to one of those false dichotomies where you either say yes and look like some sort of caveman, or you say no and you sell out the cause. Anytime you can, people out there, you can stop yourself and be like, well, it's that, but more than that, or it's more than that, but it's not less than that. Excellent answer. I knew.
In terms of the forms of things, I just want to double check. I'm almost certain, but one of the things I appreciate about Catholics, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but Aquinas was in many ways tasked to baptize Aristotle. And all truth is God's truth. Like if we can plunder the libraries of Babylon, we don't burn the libraries. We would plunder them, and anything that is true ultimately has its root in God. And so we can recognize truth where we find it, if we find it from a pagan or whatever it may be. And so Aristotle had some really great things, but like the old classic depiction of like Plato is pointing up and Aristotle's pointing down. I imagine, like Aquinas, the doctor, angelic doctor of the church. And I appreciate Aquinas too, as a Protestant, and many Protestants do. But I imagine with that being such a big piece of the Catholic Church, and Aquinas being much more in line with Aristotle than Plato, is it true to say that Catholics, it's less about forms, but like actually like, no, the tree in and of itself is good and real, and is that a Catholic thought?
Yes, in a nutshell. This is very dangerous because I'm an Aristotelian, trained academic Aristotelian, and so this does come up where Catholics will say Plato and Aristotle, Plato and Aristotle, Plato and Aristotle. This was a 5th and 6th century lie that Plato and Aristotle were close together just because they were friends. Their thought is more disparate than anything.
It is.
There's very, very little. It's a Neoplatonic lie coming from Plotinus and some of the Christian Neoplatonists. It is Aristotle. It's true that Plato discovered, how that change is and how change works. Really, Greek philosophy began with wonderment over the one very concept, peculiar concept: change. How is it that change coexists with stasis? Because we see numbers, their numerality is always what it is. But most things here around us, we see in a constant state of decay. How does that work? And you had, before philosophy really even moved to Athens, when it was in places like Ephesus, you had Parmenides, Heraclitus all saying, well, it's all change. Well, it's all stasis. You had Pythagoras, you had Thales, but then it comes to Athens and you get Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. And Plato's the guy that really figures out, well, there's a realm of stasis. He called it the noetic heaven of the forms. There's a realm of change. But then Plato completely destroys everything he says by divorcing the realm of the forms, where things are perfect and stay the same from here. So there's no way that the forms can inform matter. Aristotle figures it all out. He figures out the metaphysical interaction. If the forms are like in the upside down, if we're talking Stranger Things, and the rest of this is matter, how is there causal interaction? Plato solves all of that. And to be honest, at the University of Paris, which is where all this was going down between the two faculties of the Dominicans, which Aquinas was, and the Franciscans, there was very little tasking, because Aristotle got everything 99% right, that Aquinas and his mentor, St. Albert the Great, and other Dominicans were staggered that this guy 3.5 centuries before Jesus had seemed tasked almost divinely, almost like revelation, because he's getting 99% of everything right. All they had to do is just show that scripture did not contradict this. So that's a talk for another day. But yes, it's so important for the men-women question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, in terms of like, where do the distinctions, where are they actually rooted? Did you ever read the Chronicles of Narnia? I'm sure you probably have.
Yeah, the first one or two. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I like C.S. Lewis, and especially like for the kids and stuff like that. Our kids like the Narnia series, and I've read through them several times by this point. But the last one, the last battle, when everything's finally said and done, and the battle is over, and Narnia is the whole world is coming to an end. It's the culmination of that time period, that age, and it's all kind of folding under. Aslan opens up, this magical door, and they go to Aslan's country, and they're looking through the door. So they're in this, typical heaven, and looking through the door and seeing the end of their world and their home and everything they've known. And they're filled with joy to be with Aslan, to be in his country, which is glorious. But there's a legitimate grief and sorrow seeing, their world end. And then they turn around and start to actually explore Aslan's country, and they realize that it's kind of just like, it's exactly like Narnia, except it's the greater glorified version of Narnia. And one of the characters, is saying, it's all in Plato. It's all in Plato. And I bring that up to say I hate that part. I don't like, because the reality is like, no, like even if this, the Narnia they always lived in was simply, the form of the substance of this real Narnia in Aslan's country. No, but it was still real, and it's done now, and it's died, and it's decayed, and it's finished. And that really is sad. And so, like, even for myself with my eschatology, I'm post-millennial, but I'm not, post-millennial in the sense that everything always gets better and better. I think there can be some massive, just like the stock market dips along the way, and I think we're currently in one. But I am post-millennial, and part of it is not just because of how I think Jesus will work through his church, throughout the gospel age. But in addition to that, it's for me, it's the end of the age. Like the new heavens and the new earth, like I personally believe that it will be this earth made new, glorified. And so not a new earth, meaning another earth, but that at the end of the age, when all things are set right, that we'll actually see like the Alps, and it'll be the Alps, but glorified. Like there, it won't be replaced, but it'll actually be glorified. And I know that's a little bit. It's the minority report, so I'm not saying that everybody would agree with that, but I like the idea, and I think that I can substantiate it biblically, that like this. I guess my point is this matters, and I think that's part of the problem with dispensationalism. Aside from just the Jews and Zionism, part of the problem is like this checking out, that thinking this world is just the sinking Titanic, and we're just rearranging the deck chairs. And instead of thinking like, no, this world really matters. And there's this real sense in which, Christians always say, this world is not my home. And I'm like, yeah, but it kind of is. Like our eternal state is not going to be, the 17th dimension floating around in the ether. Like there will be, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, but there will be a final resurrection. And it's, even if you don't believe what I do in terms of the world and, mountain ranges and rivers being glorified, to be Christian within orthodoxy, lowercase orthodoxy, we all believe that this body won't be replaced. It'll literally be this body resurrected from the dirt and glorified, and that says something. So this body is not just a form of something other, but no, it's like this body matters. And here's the other thing, getting to our actual topic, I will always be a male. I will eternally be I will have an eternal physical masculine existence, and my wife and daughters will have an eternal physical feminine existence. It matters. It means something. We're not going to be asexual in heaven. Where like I understand, not given in marriage, as Jesus speaks about, the eternal life, but that doesn't mean the fact that there may not be marriage in heaven does not mean that there won't be man and woman in heaven. That's eternal.
That's so important. Everything you're saying there is an attempt, I think, an able attempt to strike out the Gnosticism.
Yes.
Always creeping into the body hatred that's always creeping into Christianity. It happens in Catholicism as well, as why I don't like Plato getting mixed in the mix. And it is so important. There's so many places we can go, because I do want you to talk about 1 Timothy 2. We have a text called Just the Sources at the back of ours, Leave and Cleave, which is just all the scriptures one by one on women. But there's a couple things I wanted to talk to you about first. Number one, when we're talking about body hatred, we have to say it's not. You mentioned this just in fleeting, but I'd wonder if you would expound on it a little bit. The sex difference, which runs so much deeper than ethnicity. Paul VI says ethnicity matters. Sex difference runs so much closer to identity, so much closer. That is not just post-lapsarian, the way you'll hear feminists say, or crypto-feminists. They'll say, well, the difference between sex, the difference between hierarchical power is post-lapsarian only. No, it's pre-lapsarian as well. This happens before the fall. There's strong evidence before the fall, and all of the patristic fathers, Jerome, Chrysostom, Basil the Great, Ambrose, Augustine, they all talk about it being prelapsarian. They do the exegesis on a prelapsarian basis. So I wonder if you'd mind talking about that. And then
yeah, of course.
I still want to get to something you said about complementarianism, but I'll ask you that next.
Great. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So your audience, just, the little bit of interaction I've had with you, you're sharp, which is awesome. We need academics within Christendom. But so your audience probably follows you for a reason and can keep up. If anybody's, jumping into the stream who's part of my following, they probably can keep up. But, some of them might be like, hey, I'm here for Joel, and I'm a Protestant, and like Joel, I'm a little slow on the uptake. So lapsarian, just lapse fall. And so what Timothy's saying, like pre-lapsarian, is like the state of integrity in the garden before sin entered the world, before Genesis 3. And post-lapsarian would be the world after sin had entered, and the curse and death through sin. And so the idea, and you're absolutely right, is that the feminist, the egalitarian, whatever. As it pertains to the church, some of the arguments that they'll make is they'll say, well, yeah, I mean, there's these texts like 1 Timothy 2 or 1 Peter 3 or but this isn't God's original good design. This is actually a part of the curse. So the idea of male headship, that the husband would be the head of the wife, or the idea of a male clergy. This isn't God's original design. It is His command now, yeah, sure, but it's not His original design. The one that He says is very good, in the created order. But this is actually the ramifications, the implications of sin, rather than God's original creation, and that's BS. That's absolutely wrong. The curse that comes in Genesis 3 is not patriarchy. The curse, as it pertains to the woman, is that she wouldn't like patriarchy. That's the curse is not that your husband shall rule over you. The curse is that you shall desire your husband. Now, there's different, interpretations and exegesis on this, but one that I think has legs, I think there's validity to, is if you skip forward, I believe it's Genesis 4. Genesis 4 is Cain and Abel, right? Is that right? It's just the very next chapter?
Yeah, that's all the way to 5.
I want to say Genesis 6, but I think that's where we get into the Nephilim, the Nephilim, which I get excited about. It's just fun.
I'll double check you, but that's what
and it gives me a biblical reference for explaining Nancy Pelosi, right? She's like, it's okay to be mean to her, because is she really human? I think she's like a lizard person.
Come on.
But anyway, so I think it's Genesis 4, Cain and Abel, and you see the same language, and it's so helpful because it's like, it's Genesis 3 and then Genesis 4, the very next chapter, same language, same word, actually, desire. So as it pertains to Cain, his temptation, his bitterness, jealousy towards his brother, God comes to him and speaks to him and says, that sin is crouching at the door, like a picture of like a lion that's about to pounce, and you're the potential prey. And then he says to Cain, it desires to have you, but you, and you would think this, so it's like, if it was just desire in the way that we typically use the word desire, you would think that, because he's about to contrast it now in terms of what Cain's responsibility, his moral responsibility is. And so, like sin, as it pertains to sin, it desires to have you. And if it was just contrasting desire in the typical way that we use desire, you would think that God would now say to Cain, but you must not desire to have it. So sin desires you, but you must not desire it. But then the language shifts. And it's not arbitrary. It's just actually, it helps us by looking at the opposite now to understand the way in which that word desire in that context is being used. So sin desires to have you, but you must not be mastered by it. You must master it. And so that the word desire in Genesis 4, as it pertains to Cain with sin, is not just, sin wants you. Sin just really likes you and wants to be buddies with you and desires you and has a wishfulness toward you. No, it desires to conquer you. It desires to dominate you, to master you. But you must master it. So then going back to Genesis 3, as it pertains to Eve with the curse, and again, this is not prelapsarian original design. This is the curse. And the curse, as it pertains to the woman, is twofold. One is increased pains in childbearing, but then as it pertains to her relationship with her husband, it's your desire, and it's the same way it's being used a chapter later with Cain and sin. Your desire will be for your husband, yet he shall rule over you. And so people will look at that and they'll get sneaky, or just maybe they're just ignorant, and they'll say, oh, look at this, how sad. The woman, a wife, would just desire her husband, meaning she'll just be lovey-dovey with her husband. She just wants her husband, but and here's the curse, it's the part that pertains to him. He's going to be domineering and conquering her and abusing her and tyrannical. Oh my gosh, that's so sad. No. The word desire there is she will desire to rule over her husband. But he will rule over her. The curse not being his headship, his ruling, but rather the curse is her desire to turn upside down the created order. The curse is not that he will rule her. The curse is that she'll want to rule him. That's the curse. So again, sin, the post-lapsarian world, as it pertains to husband and wife, The curse of sin is not male rulership or leadership, headship, but rather it's that a woman would wrestle against it. That in her sin nature, in her flesh, there would be this constant propensity, right? We each have to die to ourselves daily, take up our cross, and we have to mortify, like the Puritans. You have to pardon me as a Protestant, but like John Owen and the Puritans and the mortification, of sin. We constantly have to, like, or Romans chapter 12, like, offer yourself, no longer animal sacrifices, but offer yourself as a living sacrifice. And so it's again mortifying my flesh, mortifying my sinful propensities and desires. And for the woman, that, like, and that's another thing with men and women, the distinctions. It's so important that we get the distinction in nature and design, because it doesn't just pertain to godliness and piety in terms of the positive things that we're prescribed to do, commands, but also the prohibitions. And that, like, what I'm saying is, there is sin which is common to mankind. Peter talks about this, but there are also particular sins. And if we just think that that men and women will have, like, this universal list of the same temptations, we're being naive. There are sins which pertain to women and sins which pertain to men. That's not to say that a man is incapable, but like Titus chapter 2 is another great chapter. Older women train younger women, and it says, and teach them the good. And then you'll be like, oh, well, there it is. Older women can teach anything, as long as it's not to a mixed audience, right? I get to keep my complementarian, conservative, biblical card. So they can, older women can do all these teaching seminars, and women's conferences and all this kind of stuff. Because good is a pretty broad banner. That's so just teach the good. And the Trinity is good, and like, yes, it is, and substitutionary atonement and Christus Victor and all these are all things that are good. And so older women, as long as they're not teaching men, they're teaching younger women, they can teach it. But the good in the very next breath, in that same passage in Titus 2, is then fleshed out. It's almost like the good would be like the name of the university or your major, right? You're majoring in engineering. But then the curriculum, right? All the classes you're going to take underneath engineering, the good, is then spelled out. And what is it? It all is pertaining directly to the feminine and domestic role of a woman, like obedient to their husbands, lovers of children, but not given to. But then it gets to sins, and that's my point here. One of the sins, not given to much wine, but then another one is to not be gossips. So can men gossip? Yeah, I've gossiped, and it's a sin. But if my wife was sitting here and she was talking on the podcast, which I wouldn't let her do, and she wouldn't want to do, but if she was, she would, if we were having a private conversation, you and your wife and me, my wife, we went out to dinner, and we'd probably have a fantastic time, by the way. But if we did that, and your wife was to ask my wife, hey, do you have a greater or more frequent temptation towards gossip than your husband? She'd be like, yeah, I'm a woman, of course. You see what I'm saying?
Well, of course, this is how Steph regularly responds. And the only time, by the way, I will bring my wife on, everyone knows this, is when there's an opportunity to straighten out younger women, which is what St. Paul said.
Yeah, my wife will instruct and disciple women in our church all the time. Not on the Lord's Day from the pulpit, obviously.
Of course not.
But in that context, all the time. But
just did a stream saying, get rid of yourself.
She's not teaching theology proper. She's not teaching doctrine of God. She's not teaching about the hypostatic union. When she gets together with women, because here's the thing: where do women learn? And this gets us back to the 1 Timothy 2 passage, because a woman must learn. Actually, that's the first commandment. She actually needs to learn about God, but in a godly, feminine manner with submission and quietness. But she does need to learn. So where's the primary context where a Christian woman learns the things of God? With her butt seated right next to her husband's butt in the pew. And so then who does she learn from? Like the women in my church, and my wife especially, they're learning theology proper. They're learning hermeneutics. They're learning all these things, but they're learning it from the same source as their husbands. They're learning it at church from the male elders who are biblically qualified to teach. So then what would a woman need to learn from another woman outside of the elders of the church? Well, things that are uniquely related to the feminine domestic role. So, like when my wife is instructing or discipling young women, she's
Right.
not teaching them about the atonement, not
Right.
because that doesn't matter, but because they're learning that right alongside their husbands in church. So, what she's teaching them, and I know it sounds kind of funny, but most of the time that the women in the church get together, and they do so pretty frequently, but most of the time they get together for like a women's kind of training kind of thing. Here's the funny thing: it's like how to can vegetables. It's sourdough baking.
Yeah.
And then it's not just the kitchen, but it's also it's parenting. It's how to properly discipline and not do gentle parenting, but to spank, but to do so lovingly in accordance with Scripture. And it's how to submit and honor their husbands. It's those kinds of things. That's the curriculum that my wife is instructing. And if it's something that's not particular to women, but is a general Christian truth and just theology in the general sense, then my wife would be the first one to say, "Hey, you should ask your husband at
Yep.
home, and if he doesn't know, then you guys together should go talk to Joel."
Yep.
And it's beautiful. It's like, oh yeah, of course, that's what the Bible's saying.
So my wife did write a book called Ask Your Husband.
I love it.
And it's cut from Ask Your Husbands at Home. It's St.
Right.
Paul in Holy Writ. And it's funny because of all the Protestants, Orthodox Catholics out there, we have the most fixed magisterium. So we have the least excuse for having feminism in Christianity.
That's a good point. Yeah.
We're the most infiltrated Catholicism by
Really?
crypto
Is it
feminism.
pretty bad within Catholicism, feminism?
It's bad. It grew really bad, not to gripe on the council, but during Vatican II, and especially during actually John Paul II's pontificate, he called himself the feminist pope. It got really bad.
That's terrible.
It's terrible. He came up with this mutual submission thing, which I wanted to ask you about. But the funny thing is, Steph would get these know-nothing pushbacks, like, you can't write a book, and you're just trying to be provocative by saying, ask your husband. She's like, dude, it's the
quote
Bible
from Scripture. Yeah, it's a quote. and honestly, that's the tame quote. I mean, if you're in that chapter, 1 Corinthians 14, she could have gone with, for it is shameful for a woman to speak in church. She could have gone with that one. Another quote is, I don't like the way you exegeted that text. I did not exegete it. I quoted it.
Right. Precisely. And the most, to add to all of the how to run a domestic economy tutelage or whatever that St. Paul urges young women to go to older women for, the main one, I think, is it in Titus? I'm sitting here.
Yeah, Titus 2. Yep.
Yeah. That's where he says, and just like teaching the disposition of how to be a good wife. Like, are you a doormat? Are you chained to the radiator? People will ask me, because my wife's funny. She's got a big personality. She's as funny as a woman can be, I should say. But she's joyful, and she's
so funny to you. There's one man in the world that finds her funny. God bless you.
Yeah, exactly.
The Lord's work. Yeah.
Exactly. You're going to get my audience being like, no, I think she's funny. Women can be funny. It's like, guys, shut up. But the point is, she's actually helping women. She's with little rules of thumb, like the one bite of the apple rule. You can come up with suggestions for your husband, put them forward once. And if he likes them, then you're a great helpmeet. And if he doesn't like them, and he's like, no, thanks. And then you shut up and you're cool, you're an even greater helpmeet, because that takes more restraint. One bite of the apple, try it once. That's real tutelage. And women can't really get that. That's the one thing women, young married ladies, can't get at home. I wanted to show you something, Joel, that proves, I don't know if it's a propositional proof with a syllogism and symbolic logic, because I was a logic instructor as well. But this is really nifty. When you're talking about prelapsarian, postlapsarian, and you're talking about the sanctification that women are called to overcome, not the patriarchy. That's feminist. That's what we're talking about here today, overcoming the patriarchy, or F the patriarchy. They're called to overcome via sanctification their resentment of the patriarchy. This is how you prove that. We're called through sanctification to overcome our sinful desire. If patriarchy was post-lapsarian only, then think about this. Then we would be saying to sanctify women by hating their nature or going against their nature. And again, we're always Aristotelians. God made the things what they are, and the best version of the thing is the thing that's the most itself. So we would never be saying that. We're not saying that women should hate their subordinate nature to men. That's, like you said, always and eternal. Even in heaven, women will be women and men will be men. So they're not being called to overturn the patriarchy, and you kind of just proved it. Whether or not I was just writing down as a logic construct, I'm writing down the premises, and that you kind of proved it there.
Praise God.
One thing I wanted to point out to you that I'm 100.0% certain we agree about, but we're using different terms. I've studied between myself and my wife, we've written 3 books on intersexuality, patriarchy, anti-feminism. Mine's called The Case for Patriarchy. Steph's is called Ask Your Husband. And then we wrote this one called Leave and Cleave, about how you actually have fun and not be a lame LARP doing patriarchy at home. One thing that keeps coming up when you study the feminists who really started out in 1848 at the Seneca Falls Convention, the first wave feminists were the most witchy. They were the most evil. Normie conservatives were brainwashed to the tune that first wave feminism was good. Then it got queered in the second wave. That's absolutely wrong. They're actually identical in their goals. You can prove it by looking at the meeting minutes of the Seneca Falls Convention, memorialized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who says, here are the big 5 goals. It's not just women getting the vote, which is evil enough, but it's these same 5 goals that you see in this famous 1969 New York women's chant led by one of the Millet sisters. I forget which one. It's basically be sexual, get into the clergy, get into the out of the home, into jobs, be generally disrespectful to men, and also we need the vote. That's just feminism. There are no waves. We say that's a false dichotomy, but it's extra bad in the first wave because it's extra witchy. Anyway, they rightly, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, by the way, who memorialized these meeting minutes in a short document you can look at if you want, people.
Yeah, I think I've read that.
Yeah, Declaration of Grievances. It's framed like a revolution. It is a revolution. 25 years later, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who a lot of these were sort of Christian light women who were turned witches and stuff. Blavatsky was there at the Seneca Falls Convention. Lots of names you'd maybe recognize. But 25 years later, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and some of the other witches there said, we need to publish a woman's Bible, because this is the thing. We cannot reconcile what we want to do, women's rights, with the idea that Scripture was inspired, because Scripture, Old Testament and New, is so, from our perspective, anti-woman. Yeah, patriarchal. And what they kept saying,
no, I've read that. Yeah, I appreciate the honesty, but like they straight up said, like, yeah, like the Bible is what's standing in our way.
I love the honesty.
Yeah.
Because now when I'm a Catholic feminist, even a lot of, Lila Rose, Abby Johnson, these women are Catholic feminists. Yeah. And, this is why me and Steph are kind of not allowed in polite Catholic society, because people think they're not based. Like, they're Catholic feminists. There's no such thing. But the point is, all through the 1840s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, leading to the woman's Bible, all of these first wave feminists are saying that the evil is complementarianism. And even modern feminists who go back and study this, one called Katie Scott Marshall, who I think is still alive, who looks at first wave, they all say complementarianism is what, Joel, you and I say is good. What we think is good.
The language has changed.
Yeah.
Over time.
That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. So I'll explain what I mean by complementarianism as it sits today. But real quick, I wanted to add just one more thing to the manifesto of first wave feminists and how they wanted to conquer the patriarchy. One other point that just for my Protestant listeners who might be tuning in, that you got to wrestle with as a Protestant is there is an undeniable correlation between the people who are part of the suffragettes, for women's suffrage, were also very much like the leaders of the temperance movement when it came to prohibition. And the feminists the first wave feminists saw it as imperative that they had to get rid of alcohol. And then Baptists, have been notorious as, teetotalers or, alcohol is terrible. And so for me, like, number one, we observe the Lord's Supper weekly. We don't do that, once a quarter crap. So we do it weekly. The whole service, we have a covenant renewal liturgy, and the whole thing culminates into the table, the supper. Now, we do have, in your typical kind of Puritan tradition, the table is front and center, but it is below the pulpit. So the pulpit is on stage, stands above. So it's the sacrament always connected with the preached word and not severed from it, and the word stands above. And I know that we would have differences on that, but it's a part of every weekly service, and the sermon precedes the supper, because it's so we have our confession, corporate confession of sin and assurance of pardon, and then a confession of faith. We recite the Apostles' Creed or Nicene Creed, every single week. Then the preaching of the word, expositionally. Right now we're going through Matthew, so it's a bit anti-Semitic because Matthew is pretty based on the Jews. And then after that, worshiping through song as a response to God's word being preached. We're now worshiping the Lord corporately through song, and we're a cappella, and so it's primarily psalms put to meter and melody, and then some traditional hymns that we think are theologically sound and rich, and then all of that culminates at the very end in communing with the Lord and with one another, partaking of the body, which is His body, but also each other, the body of Christ. And we do use. I'm saying all this back to the temperance movement and feminism. I think you would be pleased. I mean, you would have massive disagreements with me on the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, but I think you would at least be somewhat pleased to hear that we are Welch's disrespecters. So
Yeah.
it is wine.
Good. Yeah. That much more. In line with our view of the hermeneutic on things like John chapter 6. I do like that. Very good. The Welches had to go, man. I mean, I think it reached its crescendo in the late 80s, early 90s, where it's like grape. Yeah. That's not what Jesus said. I don't even know I don't know how anyone came up with that.
It's still big. It is the majority position for Baptist churches. It's sad. Still, it's sad, and it shouldn't be, but it very much is. I would say probably 90% of Baptist churches are not weekly when it comes to the supper, and then when they do it, whether it's once a month or once a quarter, I've heard of churches doing it once a year, and when they do it, it's grape juice.
Wow,
that grape drink.
Great, like Sunny D is not orange juice; it's orange drink.
Correct.
Yeah, at least use grape juice. Is like grape drink is at the very low of the ontological order.
Right. Yeah.
What'd you say?
It's like it's a Dave Chappelle friendly communion.
Yeah, exactly. It's just purple. No, the very bottom in
purple. That's lower than grape. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
purple, then grape drink, then grape juice. Then
once it's no longer even described as a fruit, it's now just a color. Then it's like that's the lowest. Yeah.
Which is part what brings us back to the problems of Plato, right? He thought Plato didn't understand the way that substance accident predication worked, so he thought there was a purple out in the world rather than purple predication of a substance. Anyway, people are
ChatGPT. I had a Protestant friend of mine looking at like the Enlightenment and secular humanism, and then using like AI and asking. And this guy's like a tech whiz, and so he was able to like kind of, you can kind of jailbreak a little bit sometimes, like the AI, with using certain prompts and get it to be more honest and those kinds of things. And basically, what it got to was like what was the root of relativism and subjectivity and modernity and all these things, and it answered by saying. This is my body. When we lost, this is my body.
Yeah.
And so like I can't convictionally hold to transubstantiation. I'm sympathetic. but I can't hold to it. But even in my language as a Protestant, I felt convicted in saying, when I would fence the table and administer the supper, I would say, the bread that represents the body, and I stopped using the word represent. I said, the bread, which is Christ's body given for you, and the wine, which is Christ's blood shed for the remission of sins. And so even in my language, although I still hold my view by conviction, but in my language, I wanted to use Christ's language. He doesn't use the word represent, he doesn't say so I went like his body given for you, his blood shed for the remission of sins, and the cup of the new covenant. And I guess like when I think of the Enlightenment and the Protestant Reformation, I am sympathetic. I'm a devout Protestant. Cards on the table. I'm pretty convicted. But I as I get, the older I get, the more I realize, oh snap, and I want to be intellectually honest. I don't want to just, well, don't look over there and don't think about it, and just ignoring inconsistencies and discrepancies. And I realize that in many ways, the Protestant Reformation, I think it's distinct. I don't think it's just the outflow, but I think it's one side of a two-sided coin, the Enlightenment and the Reformation. And one of the things that we lost, like when you think of the Dark Ages, which in my study were pretty great, and the Enlightenment is the true enchantment, dark enchantment that came upon the world. But when you look at that, like there was a beauty and a simplicity and also a credibility. So even if it was wrong, there was still just an implicit trust when it's these robes, these tassels, this candle, this cathedral, like these stained glass windows, this book, this phrasing, these words, this bread, this body, this wine, this, like there was like an intrinsic, and now in the world that we live in, and it's hard, like chicken or the egg, and because I'm a convicted Protestant, I obviously I think a lot of it was relativity and the Enlightenment that caused the Reformation to reform further than Luther intended, but and some of the original reformers. But now you see among Protestants, in many ways, especially if they're uneducated, it becomes like a direct implication of the larger culture of relativism and subjectivity, and you see that expressed in their faith, to where it's no longer historic Christianity. It's modern, it's 20th century liberalism walking around in a Christian skin suit. But it's this like the idea of well, we don't like the Pope. Well, I don't like the Pope, but like some Protestants need to be honest and say, like, it's not whether but which. You still have a Pope. You traded in one Pope for 820,000 popes. Like now, like you're all just little popes, and nobody can tell you what to do. No one can actually disagree with you. You're not in submission to any authority anywhere. Like there's it's just well, Jesus is my only authority, which is just another way of saying I have no authority, because coincidentally, conveniently, Jesus always tends to agree with you, I've noticed. So it just becomes, it like. And so anyways, I'm just saying that to say that, like, it is important as much as we can to hold to the transcendent. And although I disagree doctrinally with Catholics, what I can appreciate and what I'd like to recover with more historic early Protestant doctrine is recovering some of that transcendence. That's just, no, this is universal. It's transcendent. It's objective. The objectivity of the covenant. There is something beautiful. You can bash it as a Protestant and talk about some of the weaknesses, but there is something intrinsically beautiful about not sitting on the hill like the little girl with a daisy, picking the petals in terms of your assurance of salvation with the Lord, and like, he loves me not. He loves me not. And tossing and turning, and like some days, I think maybe I'm going to hell, and then other days I feel assured, like there is something objectively beautiful and I think good and right. And I think Protestants actually can hold to this consistently. But with being able to say, it's like, well, do you belong to Christ? Like, do you have an assurance of your salvation? And be able to answer and say, I was baptized. I'm baptized. I'm in the covenant. I partake of the bread and the wine. I commune with the saints. And yes, these are objective signs and seals of the covenant that have objective meaning. It's not just pomp and circumstance. It means something. And to be able to recover that, like Peter's epistle, like baptism saves you. As a Protestant, I'm going to deal with that differently than you, but I don't want to go all the way over the cliff and and to where now I can't even quote the text without like 5 pages of disclaimers.
Right.
Like, no, it means something. So.
Well, I'd be fascinated on either just behind the scenes, because you just seem like such a cool guy, and I'd love to get dinner with you and your wife, with me and my wife. It's either behind the scenes privately or some other stream. I'd be sincerely fascinated to know what you make of like John 6:30-70. I don't want to do it here today because
Right.
I'm a lot of things, but one thing I also am is a man of my word. We aren't going to do any of the theology.
Yeah. That
You're
was my fault. I'm tempting you. I'm baiting you right now.
No.
So that's my fault.
I'm just sincerely curious about that with all of my Protestant friends, because it's like Jesus was born in an animal feeding trough. And like he said that his toughest saying ever, well, the most people left his side, is when he says, I want you to literally gnaw my flesh, my body's true meat, more than the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke. It says John chapter 6, my body's true meat, my blood is true drink. If you want to have life in you, you have to animal flesh gnaw my flesh. Well,
I love John chapter 6, one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, because as a historic Reformed guy, I am Calvinistic in my soteriology, and so I love John, like all that the Father gives to me, and I will raise up on the last day. I have not lost one of them. So I love that chapter of the Bible, and I'm very familiar with what you're referencing. And I love how Jesus turns to his disciples. Are you going to leave too? Like he's like the least seeker-friendly, preacher ever. Like he preaches this portion of a sermon. He's like, hey, so we just had a great church shrinking technique. That was a church shrinking seminar, and we lost about 90% of our congregation.
Right.
And now I'm turning to the 10% remaining and saying, hey, here's a great chance for you to leave too.
Exactly.
And Peter gives such a good answer. He doesn't even understand it. He's not like, no, we're still here because we get it. And the plebes, we're ignorant. No, he actually responds. It's kind of like an implicit, confession. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, but I know that you have the words of life. And so I'm going to lean in further up and further in.
It's almost like he's not being rhetorical. Like, do you know some other better place I should go, Lord? Because I will go there if I can. I have this intuition that there's no other good place to go. But if there was, I'd go there, because that might be easier than what you just told us we have to do to be good Christian. I love that. I love that.
Can I explain real quick the complementarianism thing that I was referencing earlier?
Sure.
So the complementarianism that I have in view is John Piper, Wayne Grudem. There were a few guys in the Protestant world that kind of coined or recoined the phrase, where it became very popular among conservative Protestants. And so first, it was 1988, so very, very novel. And what they were trying to essentially do is they were trying to sever roles from nature, from design, and then with the roles, they were trying to kind of get rid of hierarchical language that feminists or egalitarians could find offensive or be bothered by. And so they essentially created a halfway house between sex piety, biblical patriarchy, and feminism, and full-blown egalitarianism. And so they created kind of like this halfway house, seen in the 80s, that from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and in the 1900s, there was already this mass exodus from, you know, a patriarchal view. And so they were trying to kind of like head it off at the pass. Instead of just preaching it stronger, they can, you know, make concessions. And so, so complementarianism is, think of like, you know, like a Riesling wine and calamari, right?
Right.
Like you don't complement calamari. It's like, I would like to complement this plate of calamari with another plate of calamari. Like I wouldn't mind that because I enjoy calamari. So 2 plates wouldn't be bad. But but that's not typically, you know, to complement something, it implies distinction. It's different than the original thing, but it goes well with that thing. It complements it. And so complementarianism was the idea that it was trying to, you know, keep their conservative card at least somewhat intact by acknowledging, well, these two things are not, they're not the same. They complement, which implies distinction, but it's kind of like teamwork makes the dream work, which the husband and wife are a team. She's a suitable helpmeet. But it was kind of like this idea of the distinction between men and women is only really in the realm of role and not design. And the only piece of design that they did retain was physically, physical. So they acknowledged, like, well, okay, men and women are different physically. Men, you know, with strength, women with childbearing, and you know, so they not. But other than that, they basically asserted that at the level of design and nature, that men and women were pretty much exactly the same. You know, on the inside, exactly the same, like a popsicle. You know, that has like a white ice cream center. It's like men are, you know, back to our
Creamsicle.
Yeah, men are purple, you know, and women are pink or whatever. Like, but on the inside, they're exactly the same. But there's so many studies, like mentally, psychologically, emotionally, like at every level, men and women are like objectively different. You know, it'd be one thing if like women couldn't beat men, you know, in feats of strength, but then there's like, you know, like with chess, like you know, women can't, like the best woman in the world can't beat, you know, the top 10 men. Like they even made a Netflix original, The Queen's Gambit was like popular, you know,
I remember.
a minute, and it was fairly accurate to the story, but they had just one teensy little change, and the change was that it was actually a dude, and they made it a woman, you know, and so, and you can make arguments like, well, maybe women are just less attracted to, you know, interested in chess, and so women aren't as good per capita because less women play chess and find it interesting. But even that gets into, okay, but then how do you account for that difference? Why is it that men are attracted to a game of strategy and an intense mental focus, and women don't, you know, per capita, again, speaking of generalities, don't find that interesting? They're like, this is a game of strategy? I don't really, not interested.
You can't make the argument because the best woman in the world, there have been female grandmasters, but the best woman in the world, not just she can't crack the top 10, she can't crack the top 30. You know, that's not that's a design thing. And also
design,
yeah, as you know, and Bobby Fischer has some hilarious quotes about female chess players ever. I encourage
notorious anti-Semite too, huh?
I know he's so based, but
he was pretty based. Yeah.
He's a Semitic anti-Semite who he quote unquote hated Jews and women. But also, I saw the first chapter of The Case for Patriarchy is full of all of this.
Oh, cool. Together
with a really cool brain study, I think it was UCLA, where they did in utero something with the cortex that what they wanted to do was prove that little boys and little girls were same until they were born, and then at 5 or 10 years old, they retested that cortex that corresponds with sex-specific activities and stuff, and that they'd found that then it became more different because of, you know, culture and what did they say in the late 90s? You know, the cultural construct of gender. They found the exact opposite, and they buried the study. They found like, men and women were very, very different in this part of their cortex. The men correspond, or the little fetus is corresponding with male, what would later be assigned as male activity, female activity, and they became more unisex because culture has that transgendering force. So they buried the study, but you can still find it. But there's also the hilarious story of, because I was going to ask you about women in sports. I'm very against. It's a big part of Agenda 2030. It's in there in the goals, and it plays such a role in masculizing women. But Serena Williams and her sister famously thought, not quite so kooky. They each thought that they didn't think they could beat the top 50 male tennis player, top 100. They said, let's pick whoever's around 200. I'll bet you we could beat 200. And this kind of exemplifies the point I was making with even top chess players. Women can't even be in the top 50. So she played a German guy named Karsten Brasch, and he chugged a beer and he smoked a cig right before they went on. He hadn't even warmed up, and he beat, I forget what the other sister's name is. Both Williams sisters won. He beat him like 6-0 or whatever the equivalent is with their goofy scoring system, and he beat the other one 6-1. And afterwards, Serena said, it's a separate sport, men's tennis and women's tennis. She's like, I've never seen a serve returned that fast. It's a distinction in kind, is what she was aiming to say, not a distinction of degree.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's good for her.
Yeah, good for her.
Yeah, but to answer your question, like women in sports.
Yeah,
I did a whole episode on this, but just saying that, it's not just like, oh, well, we need to keep men out of women's sports. I'd like to keep women out of women's sports.
That's what I said. Sorry to interrupt, but what is more gender dysphoric? What is more transsexualism? Men in women's sports or women in women's sports? I say the latter. That's more transgendered.
Yeah. So we did this whole episode, and basically what we were talking about is, especially like as you get older, like the latter years, like we've had like our little girls when they're little, with our gym membership at the YMCA, play, co-ed soccer as 4-year-olds, and dad is the coach, and it's just, it's calling it soccer is pretty generous, but honestly, even calling soccer a sport is, I think, a little bit generous. I'm convinced that soccer is just a poor excuse to get people to run.
Yeah.
And I see through it. I'm not falling for it. I don't like it. But anyways, I at a young age, it's one thing, and but when your daughter gets older, the amount, like especially if she wants to be, a collegiate athlete, and she's playing, in junior high and then high school, it actually, especially during those childbearing years and puberty and young adulthood, her later teens and early 20s, there's plenty of studies that have been done, and the toll that it takes on a woman's body and the effect, like some of these women who are really pushing, to be professional athletes, or even, get into college, get a scholarship, with whatever it is. Some of these women actually lose their cycle. They stop ovulating. It's not, and then just the tension and stress that they're putting on their bodies, their hips and pelvis, especially. There's been studies done with that it directly contradicts that just biologically the chief purpose of childbearing, and that's not even to speak of then the emotional and psychological and mental effects of that. Like sports, it's a battle, it's warfare. So
have you ever played game night with couples, like your wife, a friend, his wife, another friend, his wife? Yeah. If one of them was a collegiate athlete or even a high school athlete, the woman, she'll be like in the guy's face. She's like, yes. And she's like screaming. They do this and they have the little chick guns. They don't have muscles. Why are you doing this like King Kong? And I would have to upgrade what you're saying. The female athlete triad is what Joel is talking about, people. And the female athlete triad means they lose their period. Guess if you think he's being sensationalist, he's actually not. It happens in some studies up to 60%. That is 3 out of 5 of not just professional level, quote unquote, elite female athletes, oxymoron, but at the level of even JV sports playing athletes. So it happens super, super fast with even a girl that's might be trying 10th grade softball for the first time. So one study suggested 3 out of 5 of them begin on the process of losing their period, and a lot of them do lose their period. I want people to think of the teleological meaning purpose-based implication here. When men get more athletic and they boost their testosterone, they get more teleologically able. It makes it easier for them to have babies. When women try to be men through playing sports, they boost their testosterone and it makes them not have babies, and it makes them start.
So you're talking about athletics, and athletics' effect on a man makes him more in line with his telos.
Yes.
And the woman's makes her less. Her doing the same thing makes her less in line. And the only thing I wanted to add to that, just for the soft feminist normie, like I've had conversations with people who are, again, complementarian, halfway house for feminism, and they say, well, you're saying the highest purpose of a woman is motherhood, and that's not biblical. The Westminster Confession, the very first question in the shorter catechism is, what is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy him forever. And we use the Westminster Catechism in our home with our children. But the question that immediately raises is how? Nobody's denying that, that the chief end of mankind, both, in his image, he made man, male and female. He made them. So for both male and female, mankind, the chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. But what that doesn't answer is the mechanics, the methods of how. And so for a man, there are ways that I am to glorify God. Going back to the tree analogy, a tree is not to glorify God by being a mountain. It's to glorify God by being treely. And so how I glorify God, both me and my wife, our chief aim is to glorify God and enjoy him. But the way that she's seeking to do that and the way that I'm seeking to do that is it's the same ultimate end, but two very distinct paths, and we would never pretend otherwise. So to say I'm saying that when you say telos of a woman, for the devil's advocate who would say, well, but isn't a Christian woman, her greatest telos is knowing God and eternal, this is eternal life, that they know you, the Father, and the Son that you have sent, knowing God, enjoying God, and glorifying God. And both of us would say, of course. But then the immediate question is how? How does she glorify God in her daily life? And we would both argue that for a woman, and we understand, some women in the providence of God are unable to conceive, probably because you played sports too much. No, it might be. I hope not. And if that's the case, I'm so sorry. That's tragic. But there are cases. My point is, aside from that, there are just random cases where a woman can't conceive, and yet even in that case, the distinctly motherly, nurturing, domestic role of a woman, even if she is unable to have biological children, still remains her telos. She is to be a mother, period. Whether it's a mother to biological children or a mother of the church, older women training younger women, but she's a mother. She'll never be anything other than a mother, and it's glorious and good, and it's not some second class thing. It's a glorious thing, and so that's a great way. That's a great frame. All this back to your point, a great frame for determining whether something is virtuous or a vice, whether it's positive or negative, should be, does it does it push and propel me further into this telos that the Lord has for me, or does it actually create hindrances? And
Yeah.
if there's so many studies, and this is just physically, we just addressed the physically, not to even begin to mention mentally, psychologically, training a competitive spirit. So now 1 Peter 3, that
Yeah.
man, the Proverbs all throughout the scripture, the glory of men, and especially young men, is strength. And that physical strength eventually in the sanctification process for a man gives way to a spiritual strength of wisdom. So it becomes this the gray head, a crown of glory upon his head. So spirit, but it begins like my son. We have 4 daughters and 1 boy, and so with my son, I am teaching him right now: be tough, be
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah.
He's 2, right? So like sometimes he cries and it's okay. But even when he actually did get hurt, and he's not just being a crybaby, but he really did get hurt, I'm still encouraging him. I'm not reprimanding him. I'm not being harsh, like stop that, But I am saying, hey, all right, this is an opportunity to be brave. Let's be
Yeah.
tough. Like, oh man, that looks like it really hurts, but can you be tough? And I'm teaching him physical strength, because physical strength will be the foundation. It's not to say that there's a direct correlate that every physically strong person, man, is also spiritually strong. But I think it's the fodder. The physical
Yeah.
strength of a young man becomes the potential to give way to spiritual strength later in life. And so now for a woman, if I was to sum it up for a man and for a woman: man, strength, physical, giving way to spiritual through maturity. Women, beauty. So modesty is important, but we don't want frumpy. We want elegant, feminine, beautiful. So like my church, like there's a lot of sundresses. Like we are sundress maxing in my church. It's beautiful, but it's also modest and elegant and feminine. Women
Yeah.
are dressing like women on the Lord's Day, and men are dressing like men on the Lord's Day. But that outer beauty gives way, 1 Peter 3, to this inward imperishable, right? Because beauty, if it's strictly physical, if it's merely physical, is fleeting, and charm is deceptive. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And so that physical beauty for the young woman, eventually through sanctification and maturity, gives way and blossoms, culminates into this spiritual inward beauty of the heart, was what 1 Peter 3 says. So what's most precious in the sight of God? An inward, imperishable beauty of the heart. But then, and it's so helpful that Peter goes even further with specificity, he defines it in 2 primary characteristics. So what is this inward beauty of the heart that's precious in the sight of God and imperishable? It's characteristically defined by a quiet and gentle spirit. So the last thing that I was going to say as it pertains to sports, so now taking away the physical side and looking mentally and spiritually and emotionally, psychologically, if a woman is to be quiet and gentle spirited, should we be fostering a loud, aggressive, dominant, competitive spirit within women? That just seems to go against, again, the telos, the overarching telos of a woman.
It's a phenomenal explanation. And I knew it's always my last question for someone that claims to be anti-feminist. And I'm like, I know Joel's going to knock this out of the park. I just knew this guy's cool. No, people don't. This is one that even gets my crowd that's hung in with me. I've been canceled a few times through Case for Patriarchy, hung in with us through Steph's book, which really pissed off the crypto feminists, the Ask Your Husband, hung in with us through Leave and Cleave, still supported us. They'll get mad over the female sports thing. And I think you just gave a better explanation than anyone I've ever given.
Thank you.
Daughters, 1 son, by the way.
Yeah, I told Joel on the phone. We've only talked once or twice on the phone.
Yeah.
6 daughters, 1 son, and the struggle is real.
It is.
I have just 1 son with a bunch of sisters, and my kids.
Because my son, he's the 4th out of 5, so he's he's with mom all day, and I'm as present as I can be. But husbands are called to work outside of the home with provision and protection, and so I'm doing that. And so he's with mom, but not just mom, he's with sissies. 3 sissies, and not calling them sissies like weak, but his sisters. And so sometimes I'll come home and he'll be the other day I came home and he had one of the girls' baby dolls under his shirt. Under his shirt. I was like, and I didn't give him a hard time. He's 2, but I was like, no, son, you will never be able to do that. Like that's only mama is able to do that. And sissies, we can't do that. But what we can do is we can go kill an animal and and feed our family that way. But no, we're not going to be nursing the baby dolls. So then I went, in the playroom and got him, a truck and I just started playing with it. I didn't force it, but I just started and immediately he threw down literally threw the baby on the floor and came and grabbed the truck. And but I mean, dude, the estrogen is flowing in the Webbon household. There's a lot of it, and so I gotta stay on top of it. It's me and him. Me and him against it's 5-on-2 ratio. In our house. God
gives great men like you and Tim a lot of daughters to change the culture. It's like
that's true. Man, my daughters have been so sanctifying for me. Like I hope that I'm able to shape them to change it. Like arrows, blessed is the man who has many. I want to shoot them out, and I want them to be sharp and straight and do damage. Push back on the gates of hell. Which, by the way, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Gates are a defensive measure. It's not that the church is on the ropes and hell is the battering ram coming. No, the church is the battering ram of Christ that is offensively busting down the gates, the defensive gates of hell, and those gates won't be able to withstand it. They're going to break down, and one of the chief weaponry that we have in our arsenal is our children, that we're firing them like arrows. And so I want to shape my girls to be formidable when it comes to the culture. And the way that they're waging war is by having babies, loving their husbands, submitting to them, sundress maxing, sourdough making, all of those things. But also, as much as I'm shaping these little arrows, they're shaping me, man. Like my girls have, and people be like, oh, they made you soft. No, they made me angry, not at them. But it's like who radicalized you? 4 daughters, dude. That's what radicalized me. Like by the time I had my 4th girl, I was like, I'm ready to start just busting skulls. This country, gosh darn it, this is going to be a Christian country. So help me God. By God, we'll have our home again. I've got 4 girls. So.
That's what you just said about a Christian country, something I want to talk to you about in the local section. But I'll just say this, man. I'm not trying to be funny or just say, yeah, I agree a lot. But one thing that's really cool with my son's the 5th out of 7 kids, and all the rest are girls. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Wow.
But now he's 7 going on 8. And see, I got good at being a dad to girls first because I had so many before him, and they're turning out excellently. 17, 14, 11 are the sisters ages older than him. I feel really good at that, but it's kind of scary having the only boy. And I'm like, what do I do? So, man, what if something were to happen to me? I already know the older girls are good, but I'm like, what about little buddy? What about little Gabriel? Man, he needs, because he's so dependent on me as an older brother as well as a dad. He just gets bored. They had a sleepover at a neighbor's last night, first sleepover they've ever gone to. And they invited Gabe, because sometimes he'll wander in there with them, and he gets bored when they play. And I'm like, no, we'll have a gentleman's night. And we happen to have the Switch too, and so we were doing gentleman's evening. But one thing that's really cool is I noticed this last hunting season, fall and winter. I live near Brett Favre's land. I happen to be favored with being able to have Brett's permission to go hunt on it, and I would go out there. They'd be playing with their little neighbor friend every day. I would go out there the late part of the day to just sit in the shooting house and try to kill a deer, and then in spring turkey. Killed a couple this year, and he would just ask. He's like, "Hey, Dad, I'm so bored in there. Can I come with you?" This was the first year at 7 years old that he would just, even if it was just sitting in a shooting house for 2 hours, shooting the shit, just being dudes, being bros. That was better, even if we didn't kill anything, and he loved it. Yeah, it's so good. I was so happy that he was desiring it, and that because you are worried about the sister effect. It's real, man. And it is, yeah. You worry for your children. I worry for my children nonstop. So You're just a really cool dude, Joe. And we didn't even get to 1 Timothy 2, but we're kind of dancing around it the whole time.
Well, the only thing, let me just say it real quick, and then because I know we probably need to cut this stream, but the only thing I was going to say is Paul he cites 2 reasons. So it's not arbitrary, it's not capricious, it's not women, should learn in quietness and full submission and not exercise authority over a man or teach. So right there, it's 2 prohibitions, not 1. So some people will get sneaky, they'll get cute and say, well, a woman can't teach with authority. And I'm like, okay, like show me the form of teaching that's non-authoritative.
I know.
Teaching is by essence an authoritative mechanism. Like it's
an exercise of it.
So a woman cannot, the reason why Paul lists both, he's not saying she can teach just as long as it's not with authority. Well, what kind of teaching is that? It's, the reason why he mentions authority is to say it's actually to imply that teaching always carries a weight of authority. But even if it's not teaching, there are other avenues of exercising authority as well, and she can't do those either. So 2 prohibitions, not 1, but 2, teaching or authority, both. And then he cites 2 reasons. It's not capricious, but he has reasons. And the 2 reasons he cites, 1 is the order of creation. For woman was formed from man, right? Adam is made, not quite ex nihilo, out of nothing, but in a symbolic, sense of out of the dust of the ground. But Eve is not, and God could have done it that way. He could have made both of them at the same time, and both of them from the dust of the ground. But God is intentional in His design, and even the substance that He uses for each, and the timing, the order. So woman is formed from man. That's significant. She's actually comes out of man, and she's formed after man, second to man, and she's formed for man, from Adam, for Adam. So he cites the order of creation, but then, and a lot of times people can miss this, he also cites the order and the manner of the fall. That's, Paul is saying this is significant too. Man was formed first, but woman fell first. Woman fell first, and it's not just the order, the timing of the fall, because Adam did fall, but it's also the manner in which she fell. Adam, and a lot of different church fathers write on this and say, and there's a variety of different views. They don't all perfectly align with one another, but there's a lot of guys who's, one thing that they pretty much all agree on is that Adam sinned knowingly. He sinned with his eyes wide open, and it's not to absolve him of guilt. If anything, Adam bears the greater sin for 2 reasons. 1, his position as head. There's a greater responsibility for the captain of the ship than somebody who's just on the deck. So his position of authority makes him more, not less, but more morally culpable. But then also the manner of his fall. He sinned with his eyes wide open. For Adam, he was not deceived, and that's the key word that's used in the text. The woman fell first. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. And so Adam was not deceived. The woman was deceived. And that's not to say, women are worse than men, or it's the greater sin. If anything, it doesn't fully absolve the woman. It's still sin, but it's a charity given towards her. Like, she actually didn't quite know. She actually was tricked, whereas the husband was not. But here's the deal. If that was just a descriptive text in the Old Testament in Genesis 3, then in terms of our hermeneutics, that would be one thing in terms of its application and relevancy for all women in a general sense today. But because it's cited in the New Testament by Paul as one of his reasons for male headship, that insists and carries with it the connotation that Paul is saying that this is not just unique to a one-off circumstance with Eve thousands of years prior, but that this is actually a characteristic of women in general. And to steelman it, to say it in the positive light, so you're saying women are more susceptible to being deceived than men? Yes, absolutely. To say it in the positive light, God created women in their nature to be more trusting, because it actually suits the role that it's actually not conducive for the womanly, domestic, feminine, nurturing, motherly role to be constantly suspicious. It actually is more suitable for the woman to have more of an implicit trust, whereas the man, it actually is conducive for his role as chief protector to be like suspicious. Like, you know, my wife and I were going for a walk in our neighborhood, and we live in Central Texas, and it's a ton of, like, the whole world has moved here. There's a ton of people who are first generation, Americans, or don't even have citizenship, their green card or work visa or whatever. And we're walking, and there, often I won't be rude about it, but I'll, just kind of, there's one person on this side of the street, and I'll kind of move over and make sure that I'm in between my wife and this Muslim dude who's walking down the street in my neighborhood, who may live there or may not live there, but it's just this instinctive. Whereas my wife she's living her best life now. She's not thinking about any of that. She's thinking about what she's going to do with the kids tomorrow, with a play date, with another, family in the church, and she doesn't have to think about it. I'm thinking about that, so she's just less on edge, and I praise God for that. That's a wonderful thing. Whereas I'm more on edge. So I do believe that it's not just the order of creation, but also the order of the fall and the manner of the fall, the way in which woman fell and man fell. Man deliberately fell, which again is not to say, oh, so Adam wasn't deceived, so he's off the hook. No, like, he's more on the hook. But it is notable that Adam wasn't tricked. Adam knew what he was doing. And that man, I think in a general sense, can you find one woman who's sharp and one dude who's a tard? Yeah, of course. But in per capita, in generalities, yes, I do believe that men are generally more suspicious and less susceptible to deception. And that's just one more reason why men should be in positions of leadership, not just in the home and the church. There's certainly nothing less than that, but in broader society as well.
You're a good man, Joel Webbon. That's one more reason that your wife is able to be relaxed on walks. A mark of all good, goodly, wifely, relaxed women. It's clear, evident. There's a lot of hypocrites out there. I can't read all of them, but you can read a lot of them, and it's just clear. I really enjoyed talking to you. If you have another 12 or 14 minutes, I would like to talk about the dispensationalism thing, but we're going to have to switch over. Is there anything you'd like to say to 95% Catholic audience, or any call outs where they can find you? Joel is one of the best of the best anti-feminist Protestant preachers. I know Doug Wilson is is one of the OGs there, but I really, really like your preaching on this. Say anything you want to say. We'll wrap up, Joel. Thank you.
Yeah, I just say thank you to you and your wife for hosting me today. I appreciate that a lot. To your listeners, I would just say the difference between Catholics and Protestants, I don't want to pretend. So I want to be honest here at the end. Both Timothy and I would agree that they're substantial, they're significant, and they matter. Doctrine matters. And so there really are differences. And it's a big deal, and we shouldn't pretend like it's not. I guarantee you, and I would expect nothing else, that, like, Timothy is praying for my conversion to Catholicism because he believes it, and vice versa, because I believe it, and because the two are different enough to where a conversion, I think, is a fair word to use. And so I want to say that here at the end, that this is not to say Joel's Catholic or Timothy's Protestant. We maintain our differences, and not lightly, but with serious conviction. That said, for all the Catholics who are listening, I don't want you to come away with this and say, oh, Protestants, I guess we're all good. No, we're not all good. And as loving as we can be, but still acknowledging, no, we're not. We are not reconciled on a great many issues. However, politically and culturally, I think the hour is late. The orcs are not just at the gate, but they're in the city. Our wives and children are vulnerable, and when those moments happen, any fighting man who's ready and willing to go to battle, you don't send them away. It's one thing if, like Gideon, God supernaturally is narrowing your troops, but notice Gideon doesn't turn around after God's whittled it down to 300 men and say, you know what, still feels like too much. He doesn't shoot himself in the foot. He's not suicidal. We can't afford to be suicidal. And so co-belligerent, I think, is a good word, because I know that there are strong opinions on even just like brother in Christ. Like should I use that, like or these distinctions so significant that it actually deals with soteriology and salvation and status before God. And so for those who are like, brother in Christ even actually feels too heavy at minimum. I'm just going to make the argument for the lowest common denominator. At minimum, I do believe that faithful Protestants, and there are many that are not, but for those who are faithful Protestants and faithful Catholics, and there are many that are not, I think we have to at least embrace each other as co-belligerents. I think that's a good word, co-belligerents in the cultural and political fight, because we're surrounded, we're outnumbered, the enemy is real, and so I hope that we don't go too far and just say let bygones be bygones.
Never.
No, we can't do that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I hope we don't go too far in the other direction, and where like the old joke with Protestants is like, are you a Protestant? Yeah, me too. Are you a Baptist? Yeah, me too. Are you a Reformed Baptist or this? Like, oh yeah, me too. 1689 or that, and you get all the way down second revision and then he's like, oh, I'm first, I'm second, you're a heretic, and like to part ways over the most petty things, I think is stupid. And here's the deal when it comes to Christendom at large, all the debates that matter and the sharp disagreements where like I'm not going to partner at all. I think we have to realize that that's actually a luxury of winning. You have to win first.
Yeah.
Right? The reason why there's so many fractures, like even with MAGA right now, MAGA's fracturing, and for good reason. My goodness, like
it is.
Kitty diddlers. Like we don't excuse that. So for good reason. But I would add to that at a macro level. Part of the reason for the fracturing is because the victory 6 months ago was so widespread. It was such a significant victory, and so intramural divisions in many ways is a luxury of the winning side. And so right now we just have to recognize we are not the winning side. Christians, broader Christians, so Eastern Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestants, we are not currently winning in terms of numeric numbers in a very real sense. And so that doesn't mean that we pretend to forget the differences, because the differences are there and they matter. But what it does mean is that some of the battles that we have with each other do need to be reserved for it could be like a special treat. Like you want to fight with that Catholic, great, but you got to earn it first.
Win first.
Win first, and then and Timothy can go at it. Yeah, exactly.
There's wartime conciliaries and peacetime conciliaries, and they tell you very opposite things. Right now, we need wartime advice, and that is partner with anyone who's a Christian, and that's what today's been a great exercise in, and I'd love to bring you back on, and I'm going to talk to you about something else when we go to locals right now. But thanks a lot, Joel. I agree with everything you just said. It's perfect, and if I'm ever in Central Texas or you're ever in South Mississippi, then we'll definitely have a good dinner with the wives coming. But God bless you. God bless all of you people. Deus Volt out there. We will, if you're a local supporter, which you can support me on rulesforretrogrades.locals.com. This is the engine for the show. I've been canceled from everything else. Please do support me on rulesforretrogrades.locals.com. And if you do so, then you can catch the last part of this interview on why Joel is and some Protestants are reacting strongly against dispensationalism and Zionism. We're going to do that pretty fast. There won't be much give and take. I'll just let Joel do a spiel there. But we're switching over right now. God bless you all. Deus Volt.